Before we begin this month's program, here's a quick look at what you'll find in the tech news. The winners of the Ultimate Race Weekend contest took a trip to Michigan International Speedway in August to participate in a NASCAR race, and the tech news brings you the details. Some highlights of that weekend are also featured in a short video segment that follows this month's program. Be sure to take a look. Training Tips focuses on courses related to the subject of this month's program, the Cummins high-pressure common rail diesel engine. There's also a list of the software available for updating the MDS2 and DRB3. Now stay tuned for an in-depth look at the new diesel power plant for Ram 2500 and 3500 series pickups.
As you've seen from past MasterTech programs, the introduction of the 2003 2500 and 3500 series Ram pickups brought along with it changes to the powertrain lineup for these trucks, including a new Cummins diesel engine. And new really is the right word here, since both the engine and the fuel system have been redesigned. Welcome to this month's program. Cummins high-pressure common rail diesel engine, also referred to with the abbreviation HPCR. To familiarize you with the service features of the new Cummins engine, we'll lead off with an overview that looks at some general items, such as the main engine features and engine identification. Then we'll cover the engine and engine-related systems in detail, including changes to the duties of the engine control module and notable inputs and outputs. We'll wind things up by looking at diagnosis, focusing on the information, tools, and tests you need to be familiar with. The Cummins high-pressure common rail diesel engine has several features which allow you to distinguish it from previous Cummins engines, particularly when it comes to the fuel system. Instead of a pump which sequences high-pressure fuel to injectors at the proper time, the new fuel pump supplies a common rail with high-pressure fuel, which is in turn fed to the individual injectors. The injectors deliver fuel to the cylinders as the result of a signal from the engine control module, not as the result of a pulse of high pressure from the pump. The fuel supply side of the system is also new, with a new fuel filter and water separator and a new transfer pump. The engine itself uses an all-new cylinder head and block, and attached to the lower end is a block stiffener. The front of the engine also reveals some major differences, such as a power steering pump that is now belt and not gear driven. In fact, most of the parts on the new Cummins diesel engine are different from the previous version. There are also changes in engine calibration and specifications. In fact, there are 5 versions of the HPCR engine, and they're listed in this month's reference book. As you can see, the classification involves the emission certification and which transmission the truck uses. The configurations include a high output or HO version, which produces 305 horsepower and 555 pound-feet of torque. For now, it's available only with the NV5600 manual transmission. This engine and all other engines coupled to manual transmissions are compatible with the Mopar accessory exhaust brake. Speaking of transmissions, besides the NV5600 used with the HO engine, there's also an automatic, the 47RE, and a manual transmission, the NV4500, available for standard output engines. Both of these combinations have CARB and federal versions to meet the different emission specifications. The HO engine has only a federal version. Later in the model year, a 48RE transmission replaces the 47RE. Unlike the 47RE, the 48RE will be available in HO applications, and it will be exhaust brake compatible. Just like previous Cummins engines, the HPCR engine has an engine data plate. On this engine, it's affixed to the accelerator pedal position sensor bracket or to the breather cover, depending on the build date. Among other items, the plate contains the engine serial number. The engine serial number is also stamped on top of the block above the oil cooler boss. In the area of routine maintenance, you'll find that the oil and filter change interval has been revised. A table in this month's reference book summarizes the changes. Notice that in addition to interval differences between normal and severe service, there are also differences between federal and CARB certified engines. The final item that we need to discuss up front is one that you'll be hearing about a few more times in this program: the need to take care when dealing with a fuel injection system. On the HPCR engine, fuel system components from the high-pressure pump to the fuel injectors deliver diesel fuel under extreme pressure. This high-pressure fuel can cause serious injuries or death. So you should never attempt to loosen or remove these components when the engine is running. And no, you don't have to crack open lines to bleed the system after repairs, or if the truck has run out of fuel. The system is self-bleeding. The service information and diagnostic procedures detail the safety precautions and warnings that apply to the HPCR engine. Be sure to read them before performing diagnosis or service. Next, we're going to explore the features of the new Cummins HPCR in detail, beginning with the accessory drive and then working our way around the engine. At the front of the Cummins HPCR engine, you're going to notice a number of features which are different from those on previous Cummins engines. As you learned from last month's Master Tech, there is a heater-only system available. And to accommodate this change, the accessory drive belt tensioner now has two positions, AC and non-AC. In the area of accessory drive components, you'll also notice that the power steering pump is now driven by the accessory drive belt instead of by a gear. The vacuum pump, which was previously combined with the power steering pump, is no longer used. However, it is available as a Mopar accessory for trucks using an exhaust brake. The HPCR engine uses a new crank damper with a tone wheel behind it. The crank position sensor is mounted at the front of the block near the bottom of the timing gear case. One of the gears on the front of the engine drives the high-pressure fuel pump, and you can still remove it from the pump through the access cover with the special tools used previously. Once you remove the nut, you'll notice that the gear is no longer keyed to the pump shaft because the pump is not timed to the gear train. When you remove the front cover, you'll notice straight cut gears which are thinner than those used previously. In addition to the fuel pump gear, the crankshaft gear drives camshaft and oil pump gears. Speaking of the camshaft, the engine does not need to be removed from the truck to remove it. However, you will need to raise and support the engine. We'll discuss the tools used to do this a little later on. Right now, let's move on to the side of the engine to take a look at the new fuel system components. To bring fuel from the tank, there's a new transfer pump, which is attached to the housing for the fuel filter and water separator. The transfer pump, also known as lift pump, can be serviced separately. Note that the drain valve and water in-fuel sensor have moved from their locations on the previous engine. Later on, we'll discuss some of the tests used to check whether the fuel supply part of the system is supplying the high-pressure pump with fuel and is free of leaks. Earlier, we told you a little bit about the high-pressure fuel pump, namely that it is now used to supply the common rail and fuel injectors with high-pressure fuel, and that it does not sequence the fuel injection. The new pump, which goes by the designation CP3, actually uses two stages to pressurize the fuel. The first stage raises pressure to about 200 psi, and the second raises it to between 5,800 and 23,600 psi. The engine control module regulates the amount of pressure by sending a pulse width modulated signal to an electronic fuel control actuator in the pump. This actuator admits more or less fuel to the pumping chamber based on the signal.